Welcome to the Daily Objective. Once in a while, there's a very interesting article that deals with a topic in an ideological, let's say, way. It's an attempt on a philosophical way, and these articles are always interesting to read, whether you agree or you disagree. So The Atlantic recently had an article with the title, "What Happened to American Conservatism?" And the article is by David Brooks. So this article is an honest attempt of a conservative to ask what has happened to the movement that I grew up liking and to the movement that I consider myself, the author, inspired about. So it's very interesting to see the insights of a conservative who is disillusioned, disappointed with the phenomenon of Trump or with the, let's say, more populist right. So he mentions quite often Tucker Carlson, for example. But at the same time, this article is interesting because maybe the author doesn't realize it, but it shows to us what are the contradictions of conservatism and why for conservatism, the only possible solution is either an assimilation with the left or Trumpism and Tucker Carlson. So we're going to go through this article with Mark Pellegrino. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Nikos.
And we will cover its main parts. So let's begin without any delay. So the author begins by the observation that what passes today for the worldview of the right is a set of resentful animosities. So he says that conservatives has basically been reduced to Fox News and voter suppression. And my first comment would be, yes, this is correct in a way, that this is indeed what conservatism has been. It's mostly the party that thrives in the culture wars and only in the culture wars. But what I would say is that there could be no other way. There could be no other direction that the Conservative Party could fall after all these years and decades of this middle-of-the-road pragmatism, which exactly what this author thinks that conservatives should return to. And again, rightly, he says, to be a conservative today, you have to oppose much of what the Republican Party has come to stand for. So the first question, Mark, is, do you think there was a time within, let's say, our lifetimes? You're slightly older than I am, but not that much. So was there any point, let's say in the 80s or the 90s or even the 70s, where the term conservative had something that was appealing, let's say, to you, or something that was something to be not celebrated, but worth supporting? Because again, this article seems to be a bit like, let's go back to our roots, to our philosophical roots, but also to the good times. And actually, he says that conservatives basically finished in 2012 with Mitt Romney, of all people.
That's hilarious. Well, look, I mean, in my adventures with objectivism, I traveled the political spectrum from leftist environmentalists through a type of conservatism to the classical liberalist philosophy that I have today. I do think there was a time, but it was brief, and it was sort of crushed by the acceptance of the culture by the conservatives during the 90s, when Newt Gingrich sort of led the Republican Congress to a sort of quiet Republican revolution that enabled Clinton's presidency to claim certain political victories that helped the people. Now, the left combated this contract with America, which was an attempt to sort of pare down government and make it responsible to the people, and really limit it to enumerated powers, you know, in the traditional classical liberal sense. It was fought against by the left in their twist on that term, contract on America. And I think Newt Gingrich softened and conceded the moral high ground to the left, even though they achieved some victories. But that at that time, I sensed something sort of solid within the conservative movement that was a throwback to, say, Jeffersonian politics.
So let's see what the author, where he showed where they want to go back. So conservatives want to go back somewhere. So whenever it's Clinton or Obama or now Biden, the idea is that these people do not represent the spirit of this country, of what this country was about. So the question is, okay, what do conservatives want to go back to? So let's find out what the author says in this article. So the point is that conservatives rose out of centuries of bloodbath and tribal and sectarian bloodbath in Europe. So, and according to the author, there were two directions. The one was the direction of French intellectually, or French philosophy, which somehow, I'm not sure why, the author associates with reason and faith, as he says it, faith in reason. So it's the path that considers that with reason we can have a scientifically planned society. So you will notice very often in the article that for the author, reason and central planning go hand in hand. In a way, we would say this is a package deal. So according to the author, you can make the hubris, you can make the sinful mistake to believe that you can have an understanding of the world, and therefore you can come up with principles on where the world should go to. So, and he says this is the model that conservatism was opposed to. So what was the model that conservatism was mostly related to? He says it is associated with the Scottish or British Enlightenment, with figures like Hume or Adam Smith, which, quote, did not believe that human reason is powerful enough to control human selfishness. Most of the time, our reason merely rationalizes our selfishness. So basically, what he actually says here is that there was this healthy skepticism about the power of reason in these early expressions of conservatism, and this humility is what characterizes conservatives. So conservatives are, we're not so sure about what is to be done. We're not so sure about right and wrong. Therefore, let's be humble. Let's not jump to the arena of history. So Mark, what would be your answer to someone who said that if you're too self-confident about reason, then you're going to end up a central planner or a Jacobin or a Bolshevik who thinks that you know what is best for society and you will try to implement it?
Well, I would say we see exactly why the conservative movement is failing and why it's falling apart and why it can't have new acolytes, because it rejects reason. It holds up this false notion that reason is merely a calculator. It's nothing else. It's unrelated to morality. Morality is unrelated even to the reality that our reason helps us to integrate. And so it cedes that high ground, that rational high ground, to the other side. And I think people with any sense will say, well, if it comes between, living a life of faith or reason, I think I'm going to take the rational point of view. That's going to have much more legitimacy than this other option that they're offering us, moral sentiments, these vague intuitions that we have, that culture sort of imbues in us and we follow.
So in a way, it's like they're telling you, follow us, although we're not sure where. Then why would I follow you? Right. Why would I follow you? Why would you inspire me by telling me that you're not sure where to go, what is right? Why would I do these things?
Well, conservatism tries to put some sort of moral guide in the place of what this guy says. This guy's just saying moral sentiments are real and you should follow them. Conservatives nowadays say, well, there's the Judeo-Christian tradition that provides the moral landscape that you have to navigate. This guy doesn't even do that. He steps outside of that.
So he says then, quote, this is one of the core conservative principles, epistemological modesty, or humility in the face of what we don't know about a complex world, and a conviction that social change should be steady but cautious and incremental, end of quote. My dear conservatives, this is exactly why we are telling you that you're losing. And also, there's this famous quote, I think it's from Michael Miles, but I'm not sure if he's the originator, who says, conservatism is progressivism riding at the speed limit. So listen what the author says. He says, steady but cautious and incremental change. So the left says fast change. The conservative says, oh, no, steady and incremental. And the major question is change towards what? And if you haven't got the tool, because as you said, we have to be epistemologically modest. If you haven't got the tool to figure out towards what direction, then how do you know how fast the change should be or towards which direction? So for example, if we have to revolt against evil, against slavery, this shouldn't be slow and cautious. It should be, let's go to the barricades. So it's almost they're making a virtue of, well, who knows, just slow and steady. And again, this, I can understand why Trump has completely dominated that political area, because there's a guy who says, oh, you people say that we can't know by reason. I agree, he says, but I know because my feelings tell me so. And the others are telling you slow. I'm telling you fast. So if you're telling people you can't trust anything, you can't trust anyone, someone who says, trust me, suddenly he sounds more appealing. Now, completely for the wrong reasons, but I mean, I can totally understand why someone would find a figure of authority more appealing than a figure who says you can never know. Unfortunately, because Trump, his authority is in a way epistemologically fake, but it's...
And somebody who claims that change is sort of a phenomenon that happens outside of yourself, and the best you can do is put the brakes on. You really have no control over that. I mean, I would gravitate towards the group, the progressives too, because they say, no, change is in our hands and we could do it, and we can do it right now. And there is a wide degree of truth to that.
So let's see how he defends this position. So, and actually, not how what is the alternative? So if then reason is not the tool, what is the tool? We know Ayn Rand says, if reason is not the tool, it's going to be some form of emotions. And people say, come on, Rand is making a caricature. So let's hear the conservative voice. Quote, if conservatives don't think reason is strong enough to order a civilization, what human faculty do they trust enough to do the job? Here we have to resort to a classic 18th century concept, the sentiments. Sentiments, what's that? And what he means is, sentiments is basically that you feel, you have a sense that it's good. There is a sense where, so he says, when you see, and I think he quotes Berg, when you see something beautiful, a beautiful painting, you feel, you sense it. But what happens if my sentiments and Mark's sentiments are different? Or what if the sentiments of 90% are different than mine, but I have very good reason to believe that the 90% is wrong and I am right? So these sentiments, Mark, am I caricaturing it when I see that this is another way of saying my feelings?
No, you're not. You're not. And it's funny because this guy claims to be standing for some kind of universally applicable moral truths. And then he goes on in the article to endorse subjectivism like this, and even more explicitly towards the end.
So he continues, conservatives put a lot of faith in the latent wisdom that is passed down by generation, cultures, families, and institutions. And that shows up as a set of quick and ready intuitions. My comment, intuitions, right? Like it's an open acceptance. Like, yeah, I'm basically talking about my intuitions. And where am I? I'm got lost. Yeah, so it's in a way of saying tradition and intuition is a good way to go. But what if throughout history, most of quote intuitions or traditions were in a wrong direction, or in a direction that doesn't let life flourish? And in a way, you could say that the best political revolution in human history, the American Revolution, went against most of the people's intuitions. But again, we get this timid approach that, well, don't change too much. And I'm not surprised how young people don't find any interest or any any actual vibrant political movement based on that. So then he continues. Your emotions can be trusted, the conservative believes, when they are cultivated rightly. So what this means is we have to build institutions that make you cultivate the right emotions. To me, this sounds a lot like nudge, like what the leftist does. Like you have to be in a way, how to put it, you have to be conditioned by your environment to think in the right way. So notice what is missing here, the idea of free will, that you make up your own mind based on your judgment. It's more like we're going to nudge you towards what we feel is right, but at the same time, we're not sure, so we're going to nudge you lightly. Okay, let's pause for a second for super chats. I see Jonathan is in great form today, but let's start with Roland, who says, as a reply to what happened to conservatives, it was destroyed by its contradictions. That's exactly what we also think, Roland, so we're on the same page. Jonathan says, ¿Qué es más macho, señor Mark or señor Nikos? It's a tie, says Marilyn. Jonathan says, I'm always impressed with Mark's knowledge of political history and his ability to integrate objectivism. That's why we're very happy to have him. Then Jonathan says something that probably is a comment about my accent. And Marilyn has another contribution of $10. Thank you very much, Marilyn. So let's continue then in the article. So he says what he found interesting in Burke, and he says Burkean conservatism inspired me because its social vision was, and then he continues, people who are moderate in their zeal, sympathetic to the marginalized, reliable in their diligence, and willing to sacrifice the private interest for public good. Let me repeat the key points. Moderate in your zeal, sympathetic to the marginalized, reliable in their diligence, and willing to sacrifice the private interest for public good. And my question is this not literally leftism?
It is. It's straight out of the Progressive Manifesto.
It's not even that you have to do some acrobatics. No, this is literally leftism. And Ayn Rand said in The Anatomy of Compromise, a very interesting essay in Capital, the Known Idea, if you have a consistent proponent of an idea and someone who's so-and-so, guess who will win? The consistent will always win. So you have the consistent leftist who says, look, sacrifice for the group. And you have the conservatives who are like, well, we're not so sure, but yeah, I guess, sacrifice. Guess who is going to win? And again, dear conservatives, this is why you keep losing. There is no surprise about what is happening to you, and you don't deserve anything better if we have to be honest. And then he continues, reason alone cannot find the one true answer to any social problem. So each community must improvise its own set of solutions to intricate human concerns. So this reminds me of what many libertarians will tell you, which is, for example, you tell them what's your take on abortion, and they say, let's leave it to the states. Let's leave it to the different states. So the local communities will know better. But why is this better? I mean, I understand that I would rather have different options and go from one state to another when one state becomes what California has become. But on principle, this doesn't make sense. Either something is good or something is not good. There's no point in saying delegate it to the states, because if I'm going to have my rights violated, I don't care if it's on a state level or on a government level. It's either they're violated or they're not. So why is there this thing that conservatives have that leave it to the local level? Like, is this, we could say again, in a way, it's a good thing, because, for example, you can say, I will leave California and go to Texas, which is good. But as a policy recipe, it doesn't get, I don't think it's too wise.
Yeah, well, I think it's their attempt at some collectivized form of individualism. They, like the left, approach individualism but can never quite touch it. And I think additionally, it concedes a classical liberal point that federalism is a good system where states share co-equal power to the federal government, and they can effectively act as a check against federal government power. That's their concession to classical liberalism, is to reduce society to smaller and smaller components. They haven't gotten to that intersectionality that the left has, where the groups become micro groups, except with the family. A family is the smallest micro group that the conservatives will acknowledge, but they can't touch individualism.
Not only they can't touch it, see what he says. Conservatism profound insight is that it's impossible to build a healthy society strictly on the principle of self-interest. Then again, we have to be probably leftist or collectivist, right? And if we are to be collectivist, let's be consistent ones. So Trump is in a way a consistent collectivist. Bernie Sanders is a consistent collectivist. So Bernie is telling you exactly the same thing. Self-interest and greed is not a basis to build society. Therefore, give me power because I'm going to save you from your bad self. And who is your bad self? The author tells us. True conservatism, great virtue is that it teaches us to be humble about what we think we know. Parenthesis, a bit of postmodernism here, like you think you know, but you don't really know, so be humble. It gets human nature right and understands that we are primarily a collection of unconscious processes, deep emotions, and clashing desires. End of quote. So basically, conservatism is telling us your basket cases, people, and you need someone to rule on you, because otherwise you can't be left alone. So, and how boring and cliche all this is. Like, I hear this from my leftist I used to hear this from my leftist professor all the time. So we don't need another political movement based on that. We have the left.
And here, Ruck and I argued a little bit about what was worse, radical skepticism or religion. Here you have the guy who doesn't mention religion, I think, at all, except in the very beginning of the article, as a sort of means to identifying why the party, the two sides split the way they did. But he doesn't really identify religion as a source of moral guidance for the conservatives. He identifies radical skepticism, this open-mindedness. Well, I mean, and when you have a mind that open, we know what happens. Your brains fall out. And there's a difference between that open-mindedness of a radical skepticism and the active-mindedness that an objectivist would say is the proper approach to reality and truth.
Indeed. And also, when you talk with someone with very strict principles, you can say, you are wrong because of this and this and this. Here it's like, well, who knows? Therefore, you can't even see where this ideology stands in. Now, Jonathan in the chat brings up Ayn Rand's essay, Conservatism and Obituary. So thank you, Jonathan, for this. So what Ayn Rand says in Conservatism and Obituary is that there could be no other way for conservatism than being this middle of the road kind of pragmatic movement. Why? Because for conservatism to defend capitalism, conservatism would have to throw away the ethics of self-sacrifice and the ethics of altruism. And conservatives would never be able to do this. Without this, they cannot defend capitalism. You cannot defend capitalism if you say that self-interest is bad and you have to sacrifice for others. Therefore, what is conservatives' retreat? To the so-called American way of life, which means nothing. It means something else for you, something else for you, something else for you. So this is the safe haven of conservatives, the American way of life. And this is why I would say they flourish in the culture wars, because they have these very small areas where they disagree with the left. These symbolic battles, or sometimes not symbolic, important battles, like abortion is important, although conservatives are on the wrong side, I think, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that it's impossible for conservative to have a principled defense of capitalism. And without a principled defense of capitalism, they fall on the same moral camp with the left. And again, if you find yourself in the same moral camp with another group, the more consistent group in the long run will win. And this is why conservatives, again, they deserve nothing better from what they got now and from what they will get in the future, which will be a more consistent appeal for sacrifice and for subordinating the individual to the group. Is there anything else from Conservatism and Obituary that rings a bell to you?
Oh, I think you put it very well.
Okay, thank you. So let's continue. Now, then though, he starts asking the question, so what did go wrong? And this is, again, I think the author is very honest in terms of putting the questions on the table. That's why I chose this article as something which is worth elaborating. So he says, I realize that every worldview has the vices of its virtues. So he means the good things in conservatism lead to bad things. So he says, conservatives are supposed to be epistemologically modest, but in real life, this modesty can turn into a brutish anti-intellectualism. Exactly. This is what Trump was. So conservatives tell you, well, no one can know on specific standards. So someone comes and says, good, the hell with standards. He continues, conservatives are supposed to prize local community, but this orientation can turn into narrow parochialism, can produce xenophobic and racist animosity towards immigrants and all that stuff. Again, sure, if the principle is right and that we have to prize local community, no questions asked, then why not go to this parochial tribalism? Continues, conservatives are supposed to cherish moral formation, but this emphasis can turn into a rigid and self-righteous moralism, a tendency to see all social change as evidence of moral decline. I don't understand how moral rigidity can tell to seeing change as decline, but anyway, that's conservative. Finally, conservatives.
Well, remember, he holds radical skepticism as a value. So if you're certain about anything, it's an indication of moral decline.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Certainty is conflated with ideology and dogma.
And that's why change, we cannot really say whether it's good or bad. Therefore, it better be slow. And his final point, conservatives are supposed to revere the past. But this reverence for what we can turn into an object deference to whoever holds power. I'm not again sure what the point is here, but his point is that the supposed virtues of conservatism has led to Trumpism, whereas we would say the contradictions in conservatism has turned to Trump. So in a way, we agree here with the author, although for other reasons. And here comes the last part of the article, which in some ways is the most interesting one. So he says there are two kinds of conservatism, the British one and the American one. And he finds something in the American one which he's not very comfortable with. And we will see what that is. Spoiler alert, it's support for free market capitalism. So American conservatives were united. He talks about the supposed golden era of the 40s till Mitt Romney, where you had under the same tent libertarians, Christians, urban conservatives, neoconservatives, and all that stuff. So he says they were united by their opposition to communism and socialism, to state planning and a moral technocracy. And this is right. When this opposition disappeared, then conservatives had to ask themselves, who are we and what do we stand for? And I think it's no coincidence, Mark, that the very famous Culture Wars speech by Pat Buchanan, which in a way made official the Culture Wars, happens straight after the fall of Soviet Union, where the idea is we've won the Cold War, now what? So let's go on. So he talks about the rise of what we'd call, quote, neoliberalism in the American right, and says that meant less Edmund Burke, more Milton Friedman. The right's focus shifted from wisdom and ethics. Sorry, by the way, what wisdom? You told us that knowledge is, we can never be sure, but sorry, going back to the quote. The right's focus shifted from wisdom and ethics to self-interest and economic growth. And he gives this as a reason for the rise to Trump. So in a way, he said, we sold our soul to economic growth and the ideas of Milton Friedman. and that's what led to Trump. Is there anything to that, Mark? You think there's anything? Do you recognize this is as what happened to the American right?
No. No, I don't. If anything, Milton Friedman was a throwback to classical liberalism, which he does pay some homage to the fact that conservatives are different everywhere. They basically try to conserve whatever culture they happen to be in. We happen to have been born into a classical liberalism that is unique in the world. And so conservatives, the job of real conservatism is to conserve classical liberalism, but he doesn't treat the principles as enduring principles throughout time. He focuses on individual concretes and like, for example, economic issues, and creates false dichotomies between, economics and morality and the material world and the spiritual world, and so mires conservatism in a hopeless dilemma that it can't really solve.
And to give a sympathetic reading to David Brooks' article, in a way, as you alluded, he's trying to find an answer to why Trump, and he's getting towards the point that we had no principles, we had no moral values. But the point is, when did conservatives have these values? Where did conservatives have these strict, specific values? And of course, as you said, why is there a contradiction between these values and economic progress and free market liberalism? Why is it either or? Why is it that? And at the end of the day, is what you said, it's this distinction between you can even have the material or the spiritual. You cannot have both. And again, another contradiction that conservatism is destined to pay very expensively. So then he moves to Trump, and here he makes some very good points that he understands Trump as pre-enlightenment. So, and he says that Trumpian authoritarianism means that he tries to see conflict and a war of all against all. And actually he said, quote, the Trumpian epistemology is to be anti-epistemology, to call into question the whole idea of truth, to utter whatever lie will help you get attention to power. End of quote. I agree with the author, but isn't Trump then just making use of the quote weak epistemology that conservatism has supposedly supported, this humble epistemological view that we can't really know? So again, why is it weird that then someone comes and says, "Oh no, by the way, I do know"? So,
yeah, but I also think that Trump is a reaction to the times, right? The left has divorced itself from epistemology too. They've replaced it with this thing called lived experience, and the right has replaced epistemology with this idea of moral sentiments. I mean, we're on both sides of the aisle. We have irrationality reigning, and so a Trump who claims to be able to fix it all, has a messianic vision of the world that sort of takes little bits and pieces of popular culture and melds them together in a mosaic. He seems like he can actually solve the problems.
Exactly. So again, good reading of the situation by the author, but not recognizing how, in a way, it was the contradiction of conservatism that led to that. So he says towards the end that, where do I find myself, a conservative like myself? Well, I will go half-heartedly with the Democrats. And I would say no surprise for that, because indeed, there is not much dividing the two sides when it comes to your principles and the way you view the world. And he finishes by saying that there is nothing anti-statist in Burkean conservatism, which is true. So he says the reason I kind of leaning now towards more the Democrats is because, look, like all this freedom thing, there's nothing inherent in conservatism towards economic or more political or more economic freedom. And he uses this quote: to reduce the economic chasm that separates class from class, to ease the financial anxiety that renders life unstable for many people, to support parenting so that children can grow up with more stability. These are the goals of a party committed to ameliorating not exploiting, a growing sense of hopelessness and alienation, vanishing opportunity. So in a way, he said what conservatives could be is, help more, help the struggling mother, help ameliorate the chasm. And again, my question is, why do we need conservatism for that? There's already a political ideology committed to these principles. And in a way, honestly, the author says, well, that's how I find myself, supposedly me, the traditional conservative, more towards the Democrats. And again, I applaud the honesty in this article and the zeal of trying to understand what is happening and where do my principles lead me to.
Well, look, in one respect, I think the author is right when he talks about culture being primary. I mean, was it Breitbart that said politics is downstream from culture?
Downstream from culture.
Right. So conservatism does attempt to hold on to whatever the status quo is at any given time in history. And at one time, maybe from up until the mid 1800s, classical liberalism was more or less the culture of the time. Once progressivism began to, or rampant statism, the idea that the individual is a piece of a wider community and needs to be educated as serving that community. Once that became the culture, then conservatism had to shift to protecting and defending that, and that's why all throughout this, he uses the moral anchor of leftism as the culture he wants to preserve, while at the same time wondering at why conservatism as it was, in the sense of preserving classical liberalism, is crumbling to the ground. It's because they gave up those principles a long time ago.
Exactly. And this brings us to the answer of the question, what happened to conservatism, which is what conservatism had coming to it, and exactly what exactly it deserves. And the author has another interesting article in the Atlantic on this topic, which is the terrifying future of the American right. So if you found his insights interesting, you can have a look also to this other article. So, dear producer, is there any announcement we have to do or anything else? Okay, I don't see anything. So we have.
Can I just say one thing before you get into super chats?
Of course. Yeah.
I think there could be a potential save for conservatism, and that is they got to get off of Burke and Hamilton as their front men, and they have to embrace Jefferson. And when they do that, some of the stuff will fall away.
Yeah, and actually, that's a very good point, that we need to end on a positive. So, yes, if you try to go back to the roots, you will realize that it's these roots that leave you naked and leave you unable to figure out how Trump happened and all that stuff. So don't be afraid to kill your idols. What was this slogan? So yeah, kill your idols. You don't need Burke, more Jefferson. Why not say more Ayn Rand? So enjoy parenting at the top of the hour with Lisa Van Dam. Then we have the communication bootcamp only for members with Don Watkins at 8. And 3 hours and 20 minutes from now, live on Earth with, my mind is with Robert Nasir and Amy. Yes, I couldn't remember Amy, but with Robert and Amy Nasir. So that's all for today. We're going to be for the next 15 minutes or so on Clubhouse. We want to hear also what you have to say about conservatism. Is conservatism even worth saving? Is the Republican Party worth saving? Or has this ship sailed? Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for keeping us company. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
See you all soon. Bye-bye.